All right. We are alive.
Hello, all. Let's see here.
Toss a notification in the Discord.
There we go. Now I can watch chat.
Yeah, you can see it. Cool. Make sure you turn your audio from your computer off.
Oh yeah, I already was like, oh wait, there's some feedback.
Yeah. I heard a slight echo.
I just muted it. We're good.
Works.
So it looks like we have a couple of people joining in here now. So I'll wait a couple moments before we get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we got a few people.
Yep.
So today we're going to be doing a list building exercise. It's kind of like a Q&A session for y'all while we build a list as well. Was voted on by our Patreons in the Implausible Nature channel. And we gave them several different options, one of which, and the winner of the choice, was drop pods. So we're going to build a drop pod list. We're going to aim it towards being competitive as best we can within the limits of the archetype. So if you have any questions, just feel free to drop them into the chat or suggestions. We'll obviously take those into account when we're doing that. Or if you have questions about why we're making a choice, certainly do that. And hopefully we can get a competitive list up for you guys. And this is kind of a chill situation, so we can just chat, talk to everyone that's viewing with us. Have a good time. So Alex, I believe, here has Battle Scribe up and is going to be punching in different options as we go. So when we're building a list, many of you have already seen my video on, or the audio video rather, on the 3 tenets of list building. So that is not going to be as prevalent in this type of list because just the nature of how drop pods work, you're not going to be able to put all those extra points into some of those defensive stats because the units that can use drop pods don't have the ability to take storm shields or some of those other defensive traits for the most part. Hello, Augusto. Hello, Nick. Welcome. So, first thing that we kind of have to decide between ourselves is the type of drop pod list that we were going to run. So there's kind of 2 thoughts behind it. There is the full drop pod list, and then there is the mixed list. Now, there's pros and cons to both. For the mixed list, you have the ability to take less drop pods, but drop specific units into position to gain tactical advantage, whether that be to destroy your opponent's front lines with a dangerous unit and get into assault, or possibly with a shooting contingent.
Also block
Or
fire lanes and um, passageways for the enemy to move, because those pods do take up a good chunk of real estate, even closed. So you could use that to sort of block them from getting to objectives in a mixed style list.
yeah, absolutely. The other piece to that is you can also use those for sitting on objectives, blocking people to objectives, which is a benefit for you, while the rest of your list advance forward the main portion of your list. So in a mixed list, they're more of a distraction support piece, which works in some pieces if you build the list right. Nick Primaris cannot be put in drop pods, so this would be the firstborn only. The second one would be a full drop. The reason why you would take a full list of drop pods is to utilize and abuse the lack of strategic reserves rules, because drop pods ignore that. So what you can do is you'll take your drop pods and your entire list, provided all of your units are embarked in those drop pods, and you can null deploy your entire list and drop down on your first turn. Now, this will change how you run your list in a typical manner. So on a first or second turn, it doesn't really matter how you do it. So you're still going to get your alpha strike. Ideally, you want to go second, just because it's better to be able to react to your opponent as best as you can. You want to eliminate them being able to shoot at you their first turn. So that would be the ideal situation. However, if you get the first turn, you're able to get off an alpha strike on them to help eliminate some of those threats that are going to be shooting back at you. But if you do get second turn, then guess what? They're going to waste an entire turn of shooting against you. The downside of a first or a full drop pod list, though, is drop pods aren't exactly cheap. So you're going to be looking at approximately 70 points for each one. I believe they're 70 points. And if you're taking anywhere between 6 and 9 drop pods in a list, that's going to eat up a good chunk of your list, a third of your list. So you have to plan for that. Now, the key with both of these lists is you have to commit. So if you're using a mixed list, you don't want to take too many drop pods, because your main contingent is going to be on the ground, moving around the battlefield, so that you have a main force if you lose your drop pod list. And the reverse is true if you're going for the primarily drop pod list. So if you go the full pod list, you need to have as many as possible, because whatever you do not have in a drop pod is going to be stuck on your board based on the rules of strategic reserves. So while your drop pods are immune to that, so let's say you wanted to have a Terminator squad in there, and that was the only thing that was not in a drop pod, you have to deploy 50% of your troops onto the board, or your units onto the board. So those Terminators would be on the board, and if you don't get that first turn, or that second turn, or even wherever it is, they're going to get shot off the board right away, because that's going to be the only unit that is there for your opponents to see. So obviously that's going to be a downside. So you don't want to have 1 or 2 units sticking out into drop pods, because that's not going to work. So, hello everyone. That's some new. All right, so my preference between the two of them is to be a full drop pod. There is plenty of ways to integrate drop pods into your list. Typically, in 8th edition, it was pretty heavily used, and we've talked about it in some of our previous videos, is the Devastator drop.
The grav
In
bomb.
8th, yep, the grav bomb. Drop them in, take out a bunch of units on your opponent's side of the board, and move on. 9th edition, it's not as effective, just because of the changes to grav. And your grav cannons now have 30-inch range, so you don't necessarily need them to be dropped into a drop pod and get to your opponent. So they have that extra range.
Still good marine killers though. Looking at strength 5, 4 shots, AP 3, and 2 damage against marines. It's still a solid thing. They're just not the I delete a unit regardless of what that unit is option anymore, because they previously had that stratagem that let them re-roll the wound roll and re-roll um, the damage roll, which is now just a flat 2 damage, which is nice for taking on things with 2 wounds, and you just get more consistent damage out of it. But you used to be able to point them at literally almost anything in the game and be pretty sure that you're either going to cripple it or just erase it off the board. Not so much anymore. Like Bob said, they're good marine killers. They're high volume of shots, which I think is very fluffy for Templars. And they have that extra range, which is nice. Now they don't need to be in a pod. You can sit them in the backfield in a different style list.
Yep, absolutely. One other unit now that has kind of come into play, it's a little bit more spendy, but the multi-melta grav drop is pretty deadly. So that would be a unit that you could do that drop into, get them into range of something that you want to kill and just watch it evaporate. So that would be something, an example. Another example of a mixed unit that you could put up there is utilizing some Forge World units, but the Ironclad Dreadnought, using the Forge World Dreadnought drop pod.
Yep. That's going to be scary.
That's
especially with
that's
bonuses to charge.
Yep. So now you can equip them with double flamers, damage range. Drop those guys in. You get a durable double flamer unit that acts similarly to the Invictor unit. But you also have those stratagems to go along to help him out, as well as some hunter killer missiles to give him some long range threats if he's out of position. Yeah, he's kind of cool, different.
Or even just add to your anti-tank. Shooting first turn, you drop in, fire off those missiles at a hard target, and flame some troops and charge in.
Yeah, and they also have the assault launchers, which are kind of cool to be able to give one of your units that ability to give some additional D3 wounds or reduce their attacks and can't overwatch. So that's kind of nice too. But with that, then your opponent does get to choose. So it's going to be one or the other there. Yeah. Drop pods definitely are fluffy. So they work well with what we try to do with our lists. I was a big proponent of it in 5th edition. I ran what I called the defensive drop pod list. I was not aggressive with it. But I believe with the way that 9th edition and the missions and scoring has gone about, it's something that is worth visiting again. Back in 5th edition, a lot of the tournament missions were objective based like they are now in 9th edition. And I ran them to deny my opponent positioning on the board. I use my drop pods to dictate the battle. So with the way that drop pods work, they don't count against you for strategic reserves, so you don't have to drop them all in first turn. You can hold them back if you want until the third turn and get them on the board and use them to either box in your opponent or drop into the different objectives right away on first turn. Basically, you can score full points on your first turn if you wanted to, depending on the list that you take. And then, of course, there's the first turn charges, that you can do with those. The way the list worked and kind of how I envision one working now with a full list is you have your distraction units, popcorn units, as Alex likes to call them.
Yep.
Dropping in right in their face, assaulting in, you're forcing your opponent to deal with that, while the rest of your units are dropping across all over the board, getting all of your objectives. So now, not only do they have to kill your units that are inside of the drop pods, they're going to have to kill the drop pods themselves in the case of like engage on all fronts and such like that. So, and then feel free to ask questions while you're doing this. This is going to be kind of informal, us a little bit just talking back and forth. So I'm very indecisive in my list.
So we're gonna go for a battalion here and include some troops.
Yeah, so I think that should be a good start right there. You always want to have your troops. With the battalion will be a good place to start there. You're going to want to have a couple of HQs, and obviously your troops are going to be the key here. As mentioned previously, because drop pods cannot use Primaris units, we're going to be using Crusader squads. So this works out perfectly now that they are
15 points.
15 points cheaper. Or 15 points apiece. So,
yeah. Which means we can cram more guys into more pods, which also helps. So, and a pure pod list actually will be 100% firstborn, because only firstborn can ride in pods, and we're not going to leave anything on the board, so we won't be have anything to deep strike or whatnot. So yeah, for HQs, obviously we want to have some kind of a captain for rerolls of 1 to hit for our stuff. What is your HQ of choice, Bob?
So you could spend the extra points on upgrading him to Chapter Master or Helbricht. I unfortunately choose to go a little bit cheaper on that because we are going to be eating a lot more points using the drop pods themselves already. So just a basic captain is going to be the way to go here. Obviously, we can only take one. So in a battalion, we're going to want another HQ unit. And before we get into the captain themselves, we'll be able to the wargear on the captain. We'll kind of start with our second HQ unit that we need to take. So you have a couple options here. You can do a chaplain, but with the way that drop pods work, you have to essentially use a stratagem to pop off one litany when they drop in, because they come in at the end of the movement phase. And as we all know, litanies go off in the first phase.
Phase.
We're not going to be able to get the command phase. Thank you. Mind block there. So we're not going to be able to use that without using our stratagem to pop it off. So
I think it's something worth considering, though, simply because the stratagem makes it go off automatically, and we can use something like Canticles of Hate with our rerolls to charge, to make sure that the units that we really want to get in combat when we charge in will get there. I mean, a 7-inch charge on rerolls. I forget the number exactly, but it's like over 70%, I think. chance to get in. So very high chance to make that charge. So something I think it's that we should consider taking a chaplain, even if it's just a generic chaplain, not a master of sanctity. Um, so personally, I think that's something that we should consider.
Yep. The other option is going to be the lieutenant. So lieutenant gives you another reroll to 1. Also cheap. Uh, the goal here is to make sure that your HQs are going to be as cheap as possible. So I would agree with that. If we take a chaplain, keep them cheap, and then that would be a good option for us. So we have the 2 different options here with the lieutenant and the chaplain. We can start with the lieutenant on that, and then we can play around based on where we get with the
Sure.
rest of them, because it's going to be a little bit overall more well-rounded. Now,
do we want to look at wargear for these guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Should we start with the captain?
Sure. So the way I run my drop pod lists is you want to be able to be adaptive with our HQ units. The reason why that is you don't know that you're going to be dropping right in front of your opponent in every game. So whatever drop pod they're going to be riding with, even if it's with close combat units, it may be a situation where you have to drop them halfway across the board. So I believe that you need to have a ranged weapon with them. It doesn't need to have to be anything special, just something that they can contribute from a distance. Whether it be a storm bolter, or maybe they stick with their master crafted bolter.
Get that 2 damage on it.
Yep.
Plus, the mastercrafted Vulcan also makes you eligible for the Primarch's Wrath relic, which is quite good.
Yep. I won't lie. I like that relic. It's a good spot for you to take.
I've always kind of been trying to find a spot to use that relic because I do like it. It's um, but I just never seem to be able to find a spot for it. So I think in a list like this, that's a good spot. And like you said, adaptability. This list has really crazy adaptability because you're not setting which units ride in which drop pod, or ride together in which drop pod when you build your list. You choose that when you go to deploy your army. So depending on your foe, you may, decide, well, I need the captain over here with these guys this time, or the lieutenant with these guys. And you can really change up how the list plays to sort of almost tailor to what your opponent has. Like there may be some armies we don't want to charge them. We want to, do area denial, you know, um, and and just sort of hold back and shoot as much as we can, and then engage in combat when we have to. So this list really will give you that flexibility. So, and especially having, like you said, having a little bit of ranged with our characters isn't a bad thing.
Yep. So I think that would be a good option for him.
And it's
And
free.
a captain. Yeah. And it doesn't cost you anything. We, don't want to waste a relic. We may need to take something else in the future here, but an extra 1 CP is not going to break us. So,
How about a melee weapon for him?
so this is personal preference, and in this type of list, because I've built them before, I really don't want to waste the ability of the captain taking a relic sword or a relic blade.
Yeah, I like the relic blade
It's
option too. It's such a good that it's such a good weapon now that they gave it +3 strength and flat 2 damage. It really helps make it a competitor with the 2 times strength weapons because you're only losing 1 strength off of it. And you're still getting good AP and good damage and you're not taking that -1 to hit. So I like that as a choice.
Yep.
It's not a weapon that we get to choose often. There's only a few units that can take it, so that makes it really really helpful.
Yep. And with him unable to re-roll his own ones with that, that it's going to be really huge. That -1 would be
Hitting on
really kind of
twos.
killer.
Yeah. Yep. And do we want to make him our warlord?
I think that will probably be the safe. He's got the most wounds
Yep.
on that. Now, for the warlord trait, it's going to be kind of a preference based on this. Depending how the list goes, I think we should probably wait to see where he's going to be going. Obvious
Probably.
choices here are going to be like a frontline commander for additional charge range if we put him with a close combat unit. If he's going to be with an elite choice, the Rights of War would be a good option for him as well. Adaptability is going to be key here. So it just depends on the rest of our list goes. I don't know if you have any other additional. Storm of Fire also might be decent if you stick him with a shooting unit.
Yeah. I think probably frontline commander would be my first choice, followed by Rights of War, simply because it gives you the most flexibility. I mean, +1 to charges is always going to be good, especially if we decide not to take a chaplain. You'll definitely want some kind of bonus so that your melee units, if you want to deploy in their face and charge, you'll have a better chance of doing so. That would probably be my first choice.
Hello, Julian. We're using the Battle Scribe list builder on the PC. So for now, I suppose we could go with the frontline commander option here. It's a good option, and we can always come back and change it if need be.
Yep. Depending on how the rest of the list goes.
Yep, absolutely.
So how about for our lieutenant?
So then
here?
So the same thoughts are going to be here with that. So you want to have some adaptability. So you want to have a ranged weapon and a melee weapon, depending on what you're going to be choosing. So this is a place where you can get a little bit spendy on your CP if you would like, and it's one of the few areas that we're going to really do it. So both of our captains are going to be a source of melee and ranged. So you could put something like a Stormbolter on him and give him a little bit more beefy of a weapon. You can keep his Mastercrafted. Yep, it's free. So that's one of the reasons why I mentioned that Stormbolter. Yep. So Stormbolter would be an amazing option for him. And with the melee, hear me out here, is maybe a Teeth of Terra.
Yep.
Give him a little bit of a little bit extra punch.
Yep. I agree with that. Plus, then he's super cheap. He's only 70 points with his Startis Chainsword, which becomes the Teeth of Terra if we decide to do that, and a Stormbolter, which makes him, got a little bit of shooting, and he's only 70 points. We didn't spend anything extra, so
yep.
So yeah.
So that's a great start.
We'll go ahead
and then if you really wanted to make,
and then if we decide to change that, we can later.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you really wanted to get spendy, you could give him the hero of the chapter and then use the other option that you didn't select for frontline commander or Rights of War. And we may do that later on, but It's an option.
Okay, so now Matthew, that a little bit late, but we're just still getting started, so no worries. Glad you could join us.
Yeah, welcome. So we have our troops. So as talked about a little bit earlier, is we only have one option for this. Well, really, there's two options: tactical squads or Crusader squads. But at this point, there's really no reason to take tacticals because they're 18 points.
Yep. Even if they were the same points, there's zero reason to take a tactical squad other than the fact that they can combat squad, which I don't think we would be doing. Crusader squads are better in every way than tacticals, even without the points difference. So absolutely worth always taking Crusader squads in this situation. So,
Okay.
how do we want to arm them?
Okay, so this is my opinion on how I use my troops with a drop pod, and it has been an effective use. And I'm obviously I'll take consideration any of the comments you guys have, but I'll explain kind of what I feel about them. The Crusader squads are there to take objectives. They're not meant to be in battle. They're not meant to do a whole lot with the list itself. That's where our elites, fast attack, and heavy supports are going to come into play. They're meant to win us the game ultimately with their objective secured. So I tend to keep them cheap. We could go with larger squads and use them for assault. But I feel those points are going to be better used in something like a Vanguard veteran or a Stern Guard where they have the oomph to go with those points.
I agree. Do we want to give them
So
a heavy weapon or a special weapon?
I do spend some extra points on the heavy weapons, though, with that being said. So you're going to be dropping them all over the board, and ideally not in front of your opponent. So you do want to give them something that's going to contribute to the board. Now, fortunately, we have an excellent weapon that is dirtball cheap in the grav cannon. It has a 30-inch range, so no matter where you put it on the board, you will most likely be in range of something of your opponent. And be able to, for 10 points, plink off a decent amount of wounds from your opponent if they're using mech. It's still decent against non-mech because it still has the 4 dots.
Yeah, and
strength
when we
5.
say mech, we mean MEQ, the Marine equivalent, not mech as in tanks.
Yeah. So it's a great unit. You could also go with
We're gonna
heavy bolters.
go bolt guns with them, since they'll
Yes,
be
I
sitting on
would.
objectives. Yeah.
Yep.
The something else to consider: the sword brother. We can take advantage of. He gets a storm bolter on the discount for 3 points. Gives you a little bit of extra firepower, and it's not too expensive.
Yep. And that's something I was going to suggest as well. He has access to some additional long range weaponry, so that would be something to take. One thing you also want to make sure that you're taking with him is he gets that upgrade to the Astartes chainsword as well, so you're
Yep.
going to want to give him that.
Swap his bolt pistol for a chainsword.
Yep. At least then you
Absolutely.
have something that can give some AP damage if they get into
Yep.
close combat.
I assume we're gonna run minimum squad sizes here for maximum cramming into vehicles or into drop pods. I
Correct.
mean, yeah. I would say probably go with virtually the same loadout for these guys. Um, with one exception, I might include, instead of a third grav cannon, I might include a single heavy bolter. There is a very nice stratagem, which you can have a uh, you can have spend 1 CP, and if you hit, you do D3 mortal wounds. If it's a monster, it's just a flat 3 mortal wounds. So, especially given some of the new things, the new Necrons. There's Necrons have several monsters now. They're big guns. They're Canoptech Doomstalkers are monsters. Tyranids have monsters. There's plenty of options out there where you can just get that flat 3 mortal wounds, which is really nice. And you can also use it to kill Marines because it's damage too. So I think it's a good utility option there, and it's the same cost as the Grav Cannon.
Yeah. Hellfire shells is the stratagem he was
Yes, thank you.
referring to.
Couldn't think of it.
Now, if we have some additional points later on in the list building here, another option for these Crusader squads would be to add on a Neophyte to give them access to the smokescreen keyword and stratagem. But we'll see how our points play out, because that'll give them a little bit of additional durability
And if we have the slots and the drop
options.
pods for them too.
Yeah. But we'll kind of play with that as we go. So now we have our minimum requirements taken care of. So we have the 3
We have
troops.
a legal list.
So if
But
you
it's
wanted to play it like this, you could.
only 429 points. I think you'd have trouble.
There is one difference that you do want to add, obviously, because for each of those units, you want to take your drop pod.
Correct.
So
let's go ahead and get that in there. And your drop pods, you'll want to run the Stormbolter. The Deathwind is just not any good. Strength 5 is nice, but not having any AP at all and only a 12-inch range is horrendously bad versus 24 inches. And the drop pod is stationary, so you're always going to be double tapping that Stormbolter.
And then, like we mentioned, it could be across the board, so you want that additional range.
Yep.
So
that additional range. And like I said, you'll even when you drop in, you'll still count as stationary. Now, normally when you deep strike, you do count anytime you come in as reinforcements, you count as having moved your full move value. Well, the drop pod doesn't have a move value. It's 0. So you essentially didn't move. The pod itself doesn't count as moving. So you'll get that double tap on the bolter discipline. So
all right, now comes the fun part. So as I mentioned earlier, again, I'll repeat some of these things, for those that are late coming, is you want to have something that's able to distract your opponent. Since we're going to kind of be playing this sort of like a defensive list, we want to be able to manipulate the opponent into reacting to what we are doing rather than the other way around. But the only way to do that is to put something in their face to slow them down, to give them a distraction. Carnifex is a common term for it, that they have to deal with it, or it's going to be rampaging through their lines and it'll mess up their game plan. Now, traditionally in drop pod lists, Dreadnoughts are an excellent place to do that. We could also do Vanguard veterans, Stern Guard.
why not both?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a fun place that we can play around with our list here. Excuse me. And then again, if you have any questions about anything, or want to ask in the chat, feel free. We'll answer questions while we're doing this. It doesn't have to be anything list related. You can just throw stuff at us. So, all right.
So, do we want to drop in some ironclads?
I think they're kind of fun. I won't lie.
Yep.
I like the idea of having something that's durable in your opponent's face that they can't just outright kill right away.
It's tough 8 with -1 damage, and yeah, for 135 points base, that's absurd durability. So I would always, we talked about this in our Dreadnought video, I would always recommend the Chain Fist over the Seismic Hammer. The reason is the Seismic Hammer, I'll show you the stats right here on the Battle Scribe. AP 4, which is great, flat damage 5, which is insane, does take a -1 to hit. If we look at the Chain Fist, same AP 4, damage 2d3, so a little more swingy, but higher damage potential. And if you're hitting a vehicle, then it's a flat damage 6. So the big difference here is it does not take that -1 to hit. So yes, your damage may be a little bit more swingy than the Seismic Hammer is, but the Ironclad only has 4 attacks base, so 5 on the charge. That's not a ton of attacks. You want every one of them to count. So really important that you're not taking penalties to hit if you don't have to. And you'll get to reroll ones because we're going to include the Dreadnought combat weapon. I prefer the go double flamers here. I think it's worth the 10 points to, especially because you have 12-inch range now with them, and just roast something. Plus, nobody's going to want to charge that. He can shoot them in combat with no penalty because they auto hit. So really good option there. Bob, do we want to
Yep.
include some hunter killers on these guys?
Yes, I would, at least on the with these guys, I would want to give them as much long range options as possible.
Just in case we need to drop them further afield.
Yep, yep.
How about the
And
assault launchers
I like it. We can cut it later on if
if
we
we
need
need some
to.
points? Yeah.
Augusto, is the Emperor's Champion still worth it? In a competitive list, when you're running basic 2 HQs, you're going to have buffs as much as possible. So on a standard list, you're going to be looking at a captain or a chaplain typically. You want to have something that is going to be a force multiplier for your list as much as possible for the points. So if you're running the newer edge style list building with the Vanguard detachment, Emperor's Champion really doesn't fit what we need to do with the list. Those buffs are really hard to replace taking an Emperor's Champion.
Yeah,
He would be
absolutely.
much more viable if he was in the elites unit or slot, but as an HQ unit,
Or
you
even a
really
no full
can't
source.
lose.
Yeah, we've said this before on some of our videos. I I want to love the Emperor's Champion. He's such a cool and flavorful model, and he is ridiculous against characters. He will kill most characters in the game before they even get to swing. Your average Primaris Space Marine just dies outright before they even get to swing against him, because he's just absurd. But like Bob said, he just doesn't multiply he doesn't bring any buffs, and that's a problem because he's an HQ. He takes up a very valuable slot. If he were an elite, I would probably take him in almost every list, as just a cheap threat, because he's absurdly cheap. But I feel like as an HQ slot, unfortunately, they're too important for our buffing characters like chaplains and captains and things like that.
Now, with that being said, in a traditional list that would be applicable, but we're making a kind of a little bit of a non-traditional list, so there might be a place for them in
Yeah,
this list.
yeah. And this list sort of solves one of his issues, which is mobility. He's firstborn on foot. He doesn't have much mobility, so getting him to where you want him is always a trick. And I think with a pod you can really place him where you want, or use him as a strong countercharge threat.
Yeah, so we'll definitely consider them in this list.
Great question.
Okay, so we have our ironclad. That's going to be a good start to our distraction forces. Again, we want to be able to contribute across the board wherever possible. So, we have our flamers that will be effective in mass against MEQ, but especially against hordes. It's going to be basically the equivalent of an Incentium cannon on Invictor Dreadnought, or I'm sorry, the Invictor Warsuit.
I wish it were a
And then you have
Dreadnought.
that long range. So it's going to be durable. It does have no degrading table, so that's also a key factor there. So while it can charge into battle and do some damage there, that's not a traditional close combat unit
Yep.
necessarily. So let's get something fun in the list, right? So we have a few different options here. We have a cheaper unit that is very valuable and underrepresented in a lot of lists is the company vets. They have a great range of different weapon choices that you can take, as well as helping to eliminate your being sniped out in the open.
Yep, they'll protect your characters, which is always a risk with a drop pod list because you have generally smaller squad sizes, and you can sometimes get spread out, and it can be easier to sort of outmaneuver and make that character the closest unit. So being able to just outright deny snipers entirely with it is definitely good.
So that's an option. We also have the Vanguard vets. Now Vanguard vets are going to be a little bit cheaper than traditional lists, is because we're going to be taking them in drop pods, which we already know that we're going to be paying for, counting that in our list. But they don't have to take their jump packs, so that's going to cut down their costs a little bit.
They also get that discount on power weapons, which is nice.
Yes. So instead of paying that 5 points for a power sword, power axe, whatever, or your lightning claw, it's 3 points. So it's definitely something we want to explore here. I'll kind of leave it up to you guys. What do you guys think? What do you want to do with that? I guess my personal preference would be to go with something a little bit more punchy. So Vanguard vets, I think, is a good spot here.
Yeah, we can start with those. So how do we want to run them? And are we going to go 5 or are we going to go with a full 10 man?
Now, with these ones, again, we want to make sure that we are taking as many drop pods as possible to be as effective as possible. These ones, I would start with them being smaller, and we can increase if we need to.
All right. So I added a pod for them. I also got our Dreadnought drop pods in here as well. We still got about 800 points, a little less than 800 points to play with.
Okay. Now, this is another place where I think we need to make sure that we are utilizing the very cost-effective relic blade. So the Sergeant, it's almost as good as a Thunder Hammer is. Does give you that damage 2 that we talked about from Power Fist, but you're not going to lose that -1. If you're not going to go all the way to the Thunder Hammer, Relic Blade is a good secondary option.
Saves a couple
Now
points
there's
too.
Yeah. Now, excuse me. It is my belief, and a lot of top Black Templars players kind of do a little bit different, that you make your Vanguard vets multi-tooled. And by that, I mean you kit out your Vanguard to deal with multiple different types of units. Now, a common unit right now is going to be the Storm Shield and Lightning Claw option all the way across the board to kind of give effective usage of the rerolls to wound, and they're just all around blenders. And the unit itself is pretty good. I won't deny that. It does have that durability with the Storm Shield, which we're going to want to utilize for all of our Vanguard vets. But we just also want to make sure that it's adaptable so that it's useful to the list, no matter who we're facing. So that Relic Blade gives that a little additional oomph with that damage 2, but I still think we need at least one other, at least damage 2, possibly damage 3 weapon in there, so that it can face monsters. So my preference would be to take a Thunder Hammer here with a Storm Shield.
Yep. I think we want to, especially if we're going to keep them smaller, we want uh, all storm shields on them for that extra
Yep.
durability. You know, I think lightning claws are a great choice for them. Something I discovered recently is if you just prefer the look of power swords. This is also a me thing. Uh, for me, lightning claw. There's no denying lightning claw and storm shields are an excellent combination. One of the top meta choices to take for your unit. Personally, for me, I think I don't know. It looks a little silly with this. Just the look of it is just a little silly to me. So I was doing math on well, maybe take power swords instead as a slightly less good alternative. Um, with our super doctrine in effect, it's actually pretty comparable. The auto wounding helps the power swords a lot and doesn't help lightning claws at all because one of their big advantages is that reroll to wound. So if you just want the aesthetic, a power sword is a less competitive but still decent option. So I think for this squad, Bob, though, competitive wise, we want to take claws and storm shields for the remaining three guys. What do you think?
Yep, I think that would be the best option. Because the other thing to note here is we're going to be dropping them down on turn 1, right? So
Yep.
you're not going to have to worry about the doctrine. Um,
Yep.
we probably are not going to be using a Crusader helm because we're going to be keeping every unit cheap. So we don't have those big, large units to really want to go into Assault Doctrine early on. So you want to utilize those rerolls as much as possible.
Yep. Absolutely. And I mean, if we really needed to on turn two, we can use adaptive strategy to put a unit into our assault doctrine for an extra oomph. Um, but the other thing too about the Crusader helm is that it's used in the movement phase, so you'll miss first turn anyway with it, because reinforcements arrive in the reinforcement step of your movement phase, and the Crusader helm specifies at the beginning of your movement phase. So you've already
Yep, that's a good
missed
point.
that point, yeah. So you won't be able to use it first turn anyway. So yeah, so we've got our Vanguard squad here. Um, what do we want to include next? I feel like we need some guns.
We do need some guns. All right. So there's a couple of different ways you can go about this. So one of the ways that we talked about before is to use Devastators and
Mhm.
utilizing one of those combos. That's still effective. Another option, and still have a little bit of a close combat ability, is to do Stern Guard. They have a little bit different options for that as
Yep.
well. Stern Guard do have a little upgraded bolter, as noted. They're going to be cheaper than Grav or Stern Guard. I'm sorry, Grav or Melta Devastators are.
They also get a
And you can do,
discount on combi weapons.
which is also a critical piece.
Yep.
Now, if we decide not to go with the Devastator Meltas, because we're going to want some Melta in the list somewhere, this would be a good place to put them.
Yep, they can
Get
take that as
those.
well.
So they can do multi Meltas. They can do the combi Meltas.
I'd probably steer
They could
away from
do,
combi meltas simply because um, within half range, regular melta guns get the same benefit as all the other melta. They still suffer from all the same problems that they did before that buff, which is low volume of shots and very short range, and you have to be within 6 inches to get that buff. So it's uh, it's less appealing to me than something like plasma, where you'll get a lot more shots, You can overcharge if you need to. Just make sure the captain is nearby for rerolls to 1, or on a subsequent turn. Can't do on the first turn because it has to be done in your command phase. But your ironclads, one of your ironclads, can also do Wisdom of the Ancients to give rerolls to 1. But just make sure that if you're going to overcharge that plasma, that you have a reroll source for them. Um, so I think that's a better option than the Combi Melta. Multi Meltas are fine because they do now have 2 shots and they have a much bigger range. So if you do deploy them further away, you'll be fine. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
Yep, absolutely. So my preference would be one of 2 options. So if we were not including the combi, or I'm sorry, the ironclad dreadnoughts with the double flamers, this would be a good place to put those double flamers into the list to get those Stern Guard an option. But since we already have those, and now we have a decent anti-horde option, uh, Stern Guard with multi multi meltas might be an option here.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of feel like if we're gonna take some multi meltas, I like the the Devastator option a little bit better. The models are a little cheaper, and we can include 2 extra. Make sure that we have enough punch to kill what we need to, and then see where we're at for points for some Stern Guard.
Sounds good.
All right, let's add those guys in there. We're gonna add multi melta. They also get the advantage of the sergeant can give them +1 ballistic skill, which is helpful. And then you can take an ammo baby for 5 points. Do we want to look at
Then
giving the sergeant like a storm bolter?
yeah, I think he should also be able to contribute as well. So
Okay.
the same strategy with him is going to be, as our Crusader squads.
Yep.
You want to give him the chainsword and the stormbolter. It's minimal points increase, but then he contribute long range a little bit more, as well as giving a marginal increase in close combat efficiency. The new woodworker does give a good point is with those dreadnoughts and the lieutenant, you can get those double rerolls. So that's also a good option for you.
Yep. Or if you have, and since we have both a lieutenant and a captain in this list, we can also, and we have 2 dreadnoughts. Obviously, we can only use the stratagem once, but if we want, say, we have a lieutenant near one unit, and we want those rerolls of wound at another, we can use the wisdom of the ancients, um, to give that as well. I love that change to that stratagem that they gave us either option now. So you really get flexibility of what you need depending on which of your characters are nearby. Because obviously, if your lieutenant is nearby but your captain's on the other side of the board, then you just do those rerolls to hit, and you're good to go. So great point there, new woodworker.
Okay, so now we have
We're
our
about
multi-meltas.
500 points left.
Yeah. So now we need to work a little bit about our redundancy as well as the ability to, we want to be able to kill our opponent with our distraction units, but we want to make sure that we are redundant and we don't lose some of those things. The multi-melta drop devastators are kind of going to be the kill something that you need killed,
Yep.
but they're a little bit cost prohibitive
To take more than one
to,
of, yeah,
yeah.
180 points.
So that would be kind
Probably
of
should go ahead and
the
add
little bit
another
of
pod
exception.
here. And it should be noted, so far we have a pod for every unit. Obviously, we only have 5-man squads thus far. So once we've kind of finalized our units here, we may be able to trim 1 or 2 of these pods out by combining some of our squads into those drop pods.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the awesome benefits of I didn't mention previously with the company veterans is you don't have to take a 5-man squad with those. You can take a smaller unit just to get a
Yes.
little bit more. oomph to fill out a draw pod
Yep.
and potentially combine those with our units that are going to be going into our our uh, our HQs with those, so that you still have that protection against being sniped, but then you just fill out that drop pod to make it a little bit more dangerous. And I think that maybe might be an option for us here when we're filling out the last little points.
Yep.
So I did
Land
talk about a little bit about redundancy.
Land Compter has
Oh, go ahead.
a good point. He's asking about apothecary for those Vanguard vets.
So that could be one of the options that we could do for those. The apothecary, getting that little unit in there to be able to revive those. You could also go with another unit, a similar one, to help prevent that loss. There's multiple options for that. If we want that to be the single unit, that's if we are only going to be taking one Vanguard veteran squad as currently taken, we'll probably will want to buff them up a little bit in numbers to make that apothecary more useful.
Worthwhile. Yeah.
Yep.
And of course, if we're taking an apothecary, we're absolutely going to make him the chief, and we're going to give him need to give him stratagem of the hero of the chapter, so he can get that selfless healer warlord trait, which is somewhere here. There it is. So that makes him 90 points, but well worth it.
Okay, so if we're going to be putting them into that drop pod, let's expand our Vanguard veterans a little bit. So
yeah, absolutely. How many do
we have
two
options. Two options. You can make them a 9-man unit to give them some space for that apothecary, or we can put one of our HQs with them. Obviously, since we are utilizing Lightning Claws, the lieutenant is probably not the best option for him to go. So the captain might be a better choice if we decide to do that.
I think probably go with 8-man just to give ourselves that flexibility that if we want to include the captain or a potential chaplain, if we decide to take one, that we can.
Sounds good to me. So we're going to be adding 3 more. What I would do to keep the versatility of the unit there, I would take another Thunderhammer.
Yep.
With that.
And then the rest go with claws.
Yep. So now we have a fairly dangerous unit that is durable because we have an apothecary, and this is going to be kind of our beat stick unit. So now we're kind of committed to that one unit that's going to be able to decimate whatever we charge. So that brings us to about 250 points to play around with. So we in our elite squad, we still have the 2 ironclads, we have our beat stick unit, we have 1 shooty unit, and we have 3 crusader squads. Now,
who have some incidental shooting themselves. They each have, if you're just joining us or haven't seen it, they do. 2 of them have a grav cannon and 1 has a heavy bolter. So, and the Stored Brother is taking advantage of that discount storm bolter and chainsword. So we have, they do have a little bit of fire support, not much.
okay, so we're a little bit limited on points now, so we may have to go back and make some adjustments. So my opinion here is we do have a little bit of a Cuddle Rooster. We are building a draw pod list as voted on by our Patreons in a plausible nature. So we have a distraction force for our opponent. It's a smaller contingent. We have our Ironclad and then the Vanguard. But we don't really have a good place for our Lieutenant at the moment. He can go with the Devastators,
That
but
would probably be a good spot for him. Nothing worse than, okay, I need to, wound on, twos or threes and roll a bunch of ones.
that question is a good question. I don't have an answer for that, Kiss. Your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah, unfortunately, Apothecary with a jump pack is the purview of our vampire blood angel friends.
Just like we can't take biker apothecaries. They don't like us.
I mean, technically you can. A it's a legends option. You can take a biker chaplain, and he has some weird rules interactions too because he has in his data sheet he has the old apothecary rule, which lets him essentially heal. He could heal up to, I think, if he was a chapter or no, what's the chief apothecary? That's the word I'm looking for. If he were a chief apothecary, I think he could heal like something like 3 wounds. Um, but I don't know. There's some interaction with him. Don't think he gets the combat revival because I think that's keyword locked to something. I'm not sure. I'd have to go and look at it again. But yeah, he
Yeah,
has
I
some
don't
weird
think he has.
interactions, and because he's legends, he's not as good.
And you don't really necessarily need them anymore because you can't revive ATVs. So that was really the main use for them, being able to keep up with those bikers. Okay, so here's a look at our current list. We got 2 HQs. We have the 3 Crusader squads, which are meant for capturing objectives. We have an apothecary that's going to be riding with those Vanguard veterans with our 2 ironclad dreadnoughts. Those are going to be meant as the distraction units. And then we have our Devastator multi-melta squad, which will basically eliminate what you need. So we have 258 points, it looks like, to play with. My opinion is we need at least one more unit that can drop back someplace on the board that's not going to be in your opponent's face, that can be a multi-tool kit. The best option, in my opinion, for this is going to be probably a Stern Guard list or a Stern Guard unit.
Yep.
That can utilize something. And we can kind of decide what that's going to be here. So you want to make sure that we put in the drop pod right away so that we know what points we got to play with.
Yeah. And we can consider too that they could potentially ride with a Crusader squad. But we'll go ahead and add it just so we know, just in case. And then that way we're not like, oh, we need another pod. So that leaves us with about 88 points.
Okay. So these guys can take, I believe it's 2 heavy weapons for
Correct.
5, or maybe it's only.
Well, let me double check. Battle Scribe will tell us. Yep, yeah, 2.
So
where
this
do you
could
want to go
be
with
a
this?
multifunctional unit. You obviously probably want to have something that's a little bit of a range because they may not be in their face.
Right.
With our points, I think we probably should go cheap.
Okay. I'm
But
thinking
we have our
Grav Cannon or
multi-meltas.
Heavy Bolter.
Yep. Grav cannon is what I'm thinking here. They combo well with the special issues bolters, having that ability to be
Extra AP.
a marine killer. and then they'll be able to deploy around the battlefield, give something that your opponent has to think about whether or not they want to target them. String are relatively cheap, so if they put a lot of weaponry into them, they're not going to be a terrible loss. But keep in mind, if you're using them with a drop pod, you can also use that drop pod as a source of cover.
Yep.
To
absolutely
kind of block your fire lines. And they can also drop on other objectives, because some of the missions do have 6 objectives. So that's going to be an option for you as well.
So we got 68 points left.
Now, this is one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to wait till the end to play around with our company vets. This would be an excellent place to pop some of those into that Sterngar unit. To give them just a little bit of extra beef, and then if we need to or want to, we can put one of those characters in that pod with them.
Yep.
So they don't have to be following around in HQ if you don't want to, but they could be a nice counter assault unit for something that is trying to kill them.
Yep. How do we want to equip them? We got 28 points left.
Got a couple options here. I probably would go with the Stormbolter. Peter, we're building a drop pod list. So it's going to be a full drop pod list. So because of that, you have to utilize the Firstborn. Primaris do not fit into drop pods, unfortunately. So Stormbolters are a nice cheap option for them, only 5 points to give them a little bit of ranged. And then really what is going to be that last little spritz of points for us is going to be, yes, that's Battlescribe for PC. Whether or not we want to give them a close combat weapon. As a counter assault unit, I would say that we have some points there to be able to do that.
Got 18 points. Definitely could include. And they get a discount as well on the melee weapons, which is nice. So could easily go. What are you thinking?
One of the best options probably again would be lightning claws. If you don't like that look, power swords are going to be decent with them as well. Or if you just wanted to go really super cheap, you could. We have 18 points left. You could take the Stardy's chainswords with them, and we could find a place for cenobites.
I think, yeah, that could work. Another option would be give them a couple of power fists.
You could do that as well. Something a little bit more expensive. Now, the only thing I would note with doing something a little bit more expensive is, well, with a 2-man unit, they will get targeted.
Yeah.
They'll be easier to kill.
Yeah,
so,
I think that's a good point. I think I'm with you on that. We'll give them some chain swords, and then we can take our cenobite servitors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, I don't think we can. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nope.
Okay.
We can't. We are out of elite slots. And we
we
don't have
actually
Grimaldus.
are not. We actually are not.
Oh yeah,
so
you're right.
Company vets.
Company vets can go into. Let's rearrange this here. Let's get rid of the company vets. Get rid of the apothecary.
You could also move the apothecary in there too.
Because we have a captain, we can take no force org slot company vets and no force org slot apothecary. Put those guys up there. We'll re-give them their gear that we were going to do. Chapter here, selfless healer, and then our company vets. We're going to go with chainsword and stormbolter, right? We said, yeah.
Correct.
Stormbolter, chainsword. Now we can fit our. Where's our little cenobite guys? They got a nice 2-point drop for the unit, which is excellent. Cenobites, where are you? There you are. 18. That brings us to exactly 2,000 points. So I think now is a good time for us to take a look at the number of pods we have and figure out whether we can drop a drop pod, as it were, and fit in some more, maybe company vets or something like that.
How competitive? In my opinion, it has a place. Now, there's going to be hard counters to it. Ideally, they're better against more infantry-based units. Harlequins, they would have a tough time dealing with simply because the Harlequins are not blocked by the drop pods. They can fly right over them. So the best way to drop pods are best when you are able to use the drop pods themselves to block your opponent's movement across the board and kind of capture the objectives right away. So the distraction units will be blocking their deployment zone, ideally. So they have to either go around them or deal with those units before they can advance. Blocking those open passages across the board in between runes. We're going to see a ton of different units, Death Guard. I'm sorry, not Death Guard, but Dark Angel, Biker armies coming up soon, and they cannot go through ruins, which is a common occurrence on most boards. So having a drop pod blocking biker armies is going to be kind of nice. I feel they're going to be kind of a niche that no one's really tried. They perform very well in objective games, but again, they have some hard counters. Harlequins will probably eat this list alive, and any full drop pod. Their popularity has dropped a bit. They're still very in the meta in the top lists for tournaments, but their use has kind of dropped a little bit. You can see some of those analysis posts on Goonhammer that they've done the last few weeks. I think they just posted one up last night. And Harlequin usage has dropped almost 50%. They did take some nerfs with this back at the beginning of the year, so they're not as durable as they were. So I think that affected people's army choice list on that. But Dark Elder are also going to be a tough matchup if they are mobile, which typically they are, unless they're going with the more foot-based options. It's a niche. And one of the things that you also have to mention with this is it takes a lot of practice to learn how to use this. I played this type of list in 5th edition quite a bit, and the learning curve is pretty high. You have to play mind games with your opponent. So you want them to be boxed in, and having that ability to deny your opponent potentially, if you go second, the one whole turn of shooting at your opponent is pretty huge.
Especially now
it
that
does
games
have
are only 5 turns. They don't go to
Yep, exactly.
They don't go to 6 or 7 anymore, which I think is a good
So
thing.
yeah, games are played a lot faster, so that's a good thing. So to answer your question, I think it has the ability to be competitive, but the player that is utilizing the list has to to practice with it, and just know that you are going to have some hard counters, and if you face them in a higher end tournament list, you're more than likely going to see them in the top tables towards the end of the rounds, because typically it's going to be based on your wins that you're matched up on. And Harlequins and Dark Elder are doing well right now, so those are going to be on the top tables. So you're bound to see them, and you probably will get a loss at that point. I don't think there is any way really to get around that with this style of list, and just because how much points that we're using in drop pods. So I would say it's semi-competitive. All right, so we were going to analyze our list here.
So
with
I
our
just
drop pods.
tallied everything up. We have a total of 6 pods, not including the Dreadnought pods, which obviously only the Dreadnoughts can ride in. So 6 pods for infantry. We have a total of, I want to say, I think it was 41 infantry. Let's see, it's 15, 20, 25, 30, 38. Yeah, 41 infantry models. Obviously, the Dreadnought or the Vanguard vets are going to ride in a pod by themselves. They have to. The only thing that we can include with them is a couple of characters or the company vets. I don't think the company vets is where we want to put them in that spot, simply because we want to support those Vanguard vets with at least one character. And certainly we're going to probably put the Apothecary in with them. So they'll ride in one pod together. How do we want to spread out the rest of these?
Okay, so we do have our Crusader squads.
Yep.
As I mentioned before, you probably are going to want to keep them as cheap as possible, spread around the board. We can put them with our Stern Guard if you wanted to, as an option. I would not, though. Looking at the list, I think if we're going to combine units, if we chose to do that, the best option would be to put Stern Guard with the Devastator squads. That would probably be the best option if we were going to combine.
Okay.
And the reason kind of why I say that is our Crusader squads are going to be going on the objectives
Yeah.
around the board.
Yeah.
You don't want to oversaturate an objective if you can help it, because you're already going to have 2 units on it. You're going to have the drop pod, and you're also going to have the Crusader squad on it.
Right. And I mean, obviously the multi-meltas will probably want to be close to something. If you can get them within 12 inches of their target, that would be ideal. Which they'll, most likely just absolutely nuke whatever they hit with that when they drop, if they're within 12. Um, the um, the other thing is that they're still going to be dangerous at 24 inches. I mean, uh, 8 Melta shots, um, firing off at 24 inches is still solid. So they can still function if they need to be further away, and you'll want to keep your bolters in range of something too from the stern guard, and the storm bolter from the sergeants. So yeah, I think uh, that would be a good option to put those in a pod together. So they'll ride in that pod. Peter, also just something to consider too. Uh, this, while very fun and fluffy, this list is also going to be very expensive dollars wise, because you're going to need drop pods, which are not exactly cheap, for a unit that is really just a transport and pretty disposable as far as the game terms go. So pretty expensive list. You can find drop pods. You probably can find them pretty cheaply on eBay right now, because they are not what's considered to be a top meta choice. I think, but this would be something. if you want to try out this list, a good place to start would be, especially with COVID, Tabletop Simulator has gotten really popular. You could try it out on Tabletop Simulator for free, essentially, without having to buy all those expensive drop pod models, and see how you like it. Um, yeah, exactly, right. Um, so it That'd be a good spot to test it out, see how you like it, see if it's either, if you do really like the list and you want to get better at using it, that's a great place to practice it. So yeah.
Yeah. So, and one thing to note with this, while we are building the list, it's kind of a list building philosophy kind of exercise.
Yep.
You can always adjust the list.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
just
Don't
kind of give
take
you
this
some.
as a like, this is the only way to run this list. This is just kind of us building stream of thought style of list building. Obviously, if we were going to sit down and try to make the most competitive pod list that we could, we would fine tune it and change it many, many times before we came up with a final iteration. So don't take this as this is the only way to build a pod list. We didn't really honestly have any preconceived notions when we started this with you guys. We just wanted to kind of show you our list building process and sort of employ the philosophies that Bob went over in his video about list building. So, and that way you guys can get an option where, I mean, I think this list is reasonably competitive in casual games. You can practice with it and do well with it. Is it going to win top tournaments? Probably not, but with some tweaking, I think you could do well with it at a tournament.
Yeah. Even when I was running my drop pod list back in the older days, I had to borrow the drop pods to get as many as
Yeah,
I needed,
yeah,
because my list had 11 drop pods in it at the time, so it was pretty daunting. I own 6, and I would have to borrow 5, so that expense is definitely
it's a
there.
cost for
Yeah.
sure. All right, so we have some stray models, our 3 cenobites. They probably could ride with one of our Crusader squads, I would imagine, since they're mostly going to
Yep.
be sitting on an objective or doing actions, something like that.
Okay. So that's a good point. So one of the things that we could do with those. So now that we combined a pod, so we gained 70 points, correct? And one of the things that we were going to be doing with our Stern Guard was going to be putting in our company vets with them. Now they don't have any space and no pod to go into other than Crusader Squad. So that might be a place where we can cut some additional points. So if we would like, we could cut our company vets, we could cut our cenobites, and potentially have uh, a place for maybe another character or um, additional units or neophytes that we talked about earlier on the Crusader squad to get those smoke screen.
Yeah,
So that's a couple different options. We obviously everything has to be in a pod.
right.
So
So yeah, that would net us. Where's my company vets on here? Elites. Oh, there are no force orgs. So there are 50 points. That'd give us what 120 points. So a chaplain is 80. We could add a neophyte to our Crusader squads, and give them a little bit of extra durability with that smoke screen keyword to help them stay alive a little bit longer. Um, what do you think? Do we want to do that since we've combined a pod? We don't need that extra one.
yeah, I think that might be a good way option to
Okay.
go. Make it a little bit more balanced.
hmm Plus, I mean, we're Black Templars. We want to have a a chaplain in there, right? Now, of course, I have to re-add my apothecary because he's no longer eligible for the no force org slot, since we do not have company vets. So we have to delete him and add him back in. All right, and he will be right. So now we'll go in here and we'll add a neophyte. And they're all the same points. Whether I don't think their gear, to be perfectly honest, really matters. Since we have bolters, a bolter is fine for them. And that gives us enough points to include a chaplain. So we have 16 points left over. So we could do one of two things here. We could either drop a neophyte and make this chaplain a master of sanctity, or we could just leave him basic and give him like a power fist or something like that. And then give him, because we're going to want him to, if we're putting him in a pod, I think the obvious choice for a litany is going to be the Canticle of Hate. We have our apothecary who's going to protect our Vanguard vets with his aura of the 6+ feel no pain. What we really want is to make sure that those Vanguard vets get in combat and our Dreadnoughts get in combat if we want them to. What do you think, Bob?
Yep. The one thing to note, though, is we're going to have to play around with the squad sizes to get all those characters in there.
Yeah. So, Gavin, to answer your question, no, because the only objectives that you can score on first turn are secondaries. So you will not have to worry about that. You may have to take objectives from your opponent. They may use their first turn to try and get onto objectives for you, to take those from you. So you may have to take those objectives from them, but they will not be scoring points while you are in reserves. Good question. All right, so we'll give him the Canticle of Hate. And he needs a weapon. So what do you think? Do we want to make him a Master of Sanctity, even though first turn we'll be sacrificing one of his litanies?
I don't necessarily think it is necessary.
Something to consider, just to give him a little bit of utility. If we did do that, and we have to choose, if we're taking Canticle of Hate, we have to choose from the Litanies of Battle for his second one. We could take, I think it's Catechism of Fire. Is that it? Nope, that's not it. Recitation of Focus. So you add one to that attack's hit roll. So if we are needing, we could potentially, move some things around in our deployment and use him with, or deploy him near our Devastators, um, or even our Ironclads, to give them give one of those units +1 to hit. Especially for those Devastators, they come in, they're going to take that -1 penalty to shoot. That'll get them back to 3+ ballistic skill, which would, potentially help out depending on what your needs are.
A couple comments here. I'll address Petter first. Is Grimaldus is an option as well to eat up some of those points, get
Yeah,
that second.
that's a good point.
So he could be a good option here.
And his exploding sixes. That's true. And he's only 15 points, and that's we've got 16 to play with. So I actually like that option a lot. Take Grimaldus. He still uses the litany, and he gets to 2 litanies. We don't have to pay for him.
Unreal Ripper. Normally, you do have to have half your army deployed on the table, but because we are utilizing drop pods for all of them and they're deployed on it, that is exempt from that rule.
Yeah, the drop
That
pods
is one of the
override it.
reasons why. Yep, the drop pods override that rule.
Plus the cool factor. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so now let's now we have to retool. So we have 5 pods now. And we've got 4 characters. Apothecary, Chaplain, Captain, and the LT. And then we got rid of our company vets and our cenobites. We have 5 Stern Guard. We have 3x5 Crusader squads, which we're most likely going to leave by themselves.
Yes. So that means we're going to have some additional points again. So let's see. So we're going to have to make space for our what
8 van
essentially is
vets.
going to be a very tooled up melee option. So
All right,
the Vanguard vets are going to be kind of the only place that we really have a spot for them.
So obviously the apothecary will ride with the van vets, so they'll ride in pod number 1. Crusader squads will take pods 2, 3, and 4. 3 and 4. So the Devastators, so that leaves us with 5 Stern Guard, 5 Devastators, and our 3 of our 4 characters.
So in this current setup, I think we were talking about putting the Stern Guard with the Devastators. Is that correct?
Do that. Yeah, we can do that. So that's pod number 5.
So
that leaves, we got 1 slot in our Vanguard vets squad to put someone. I would probably say Grimaldus. What do you think?
Yeah, if we're going to do that, then that would be the best option. Gavin, we also we can't do any other deep striking because of the rules of the board. Is you do have to put 50% of your force on the board. Because of that, that would be the only unit that is not in a drop pod, which ignores that rule. So he would have to deploy, or that Terminator unit would have to deploy on the board to fulfill the rules of getting half your army on the board. So you cannot deep strike them. They would be stuck on the board, unfortunately.
So with this unfortunately does leave our captain and our lieutenant riding with Crusaders. Something, and I know you preferred to not have anyone riding with them since they're going to be landing on objectives. I think putting the Stern Guard with a Crusader squad wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea, simply because they do have that extra range on their grav cannons. They got that 30 inches. I want to say their special issue bolters are also 30 inches. Where's my Stern Guard?
And they could be an option that we could certainly put them. One of our Crusader squads could.
Well. So I think that's a decent option because there's almost bound to be at least one objective in the midfield. So dropping them in, putting the Stern Guard with them, it also gives that Crusader squad a little bit of a buff in helping to hold that objective, and is a little bit of an assault deterrent because the Stern Guard do have more attacks. So something worth considering, I think.
Yep.
And
that could be definitely an option.
Something that we want to do here is that I hadn't done yet is we want to make sure that Stern Guard Veteran Sergeant has an Astartes Chainsword since it is free.
Yes.
So yeah. So they could ride with one of them, and then that leaves the devs open to put the captain and lieutenant in with them. The Devastators are probably going to want to drop as close to their target as possible, and you can potentially, more than likely, depending on how your opponent deploys, you probably can get them close enough to the Vanguard vets to support them, or an ironclad for a little bit of extra help there.
Yep, and that would be fine. So if we're running this list, obviously we talked about how we have 2 grav cannons for the Crusader squads, and then 1 heavy bolter.
Yep.
I would probably put the Stern Guard with the heavy bolter squad to kind of put those kind of as a midfield unit, drop them in that middle of the board as necessary, so they can get a wider range of targets for that heavy bolter stratagem, as well as get those grav cannons that the Stern Guard are using right there in the center of the board as well. And then you have a little bit more oomph for the center of the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so, do we want to revisit our characters and their uh, warlord traits or relics?
All right, so we do have a frontline commander option on that, but if they're going to be riding with our Devastator squad, you're not going to be charging those suckers in, ideally.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Almost certainly not. Um, I think potentially switching him, although, yeah, because we have a chaplain, and Grimaldus will ride with them and give them that Canticle of Hate. So I think frontline commander, we should swap for Rites of War and make those Devastators have objectives secured. Storm of Fire might be worth considering, um, but with multi-meltas, they're already AP4. I don't know that that's really necessarily worth it.
no, I don't think so.
Yeah. Um, you could always also give him Iron Resolve for a little bit more durability, but I think Rites of War will have more utility for you because, like I said, if maybe you can't get within 12 inches of your target, that with your multi meltas of what they want to shoot, uh, being within 12 or being within 20 or being within 13 or 24 inches is all the same. So deploy them further back if you can get them on an objective in that circumstance, then I think that's a good option for them.
Yep. IK, so the main objective secured units are going to be the Crusader squads for troops. So those ideally are going to be deployed back to take home objectives, middle the board, and you're going to utilize your distraction forces, so to speak, with the Rights of War captain
Mm-hmm.
to grant that objective secured to those guys as well. Now, since we're switching the Rights of War to the captain, we don't need anything on the lieutenant unless you want to make him something like the Imperium Sword option. But in this case, CP might be a
Yeah,
better option.
I don't know if that's worth spending the extra CP on. He does not have an invulnerable save. He really is there to provide his reroll aura, and especially if he's going to be with the multi-melta devs, both him and the captain are a good, credible, um, counter charge threat. So that I think is where we want to leave him. The only thing that I might consider spending a CP on is potentially giving the Crusader's Helm to the Apothecary to just simply give him some extra range on his 6+ Feel No Pain.
Yeah, but now that we do have a dedicated unit for close combat, that also might be
It. Yeah.
worth it as well.
So we'll spend
Now,
that CP.
our combat super doctrine doesn't really work the greatest with the lightning claws, but it will give us a little bit more reliability, a decent, a slight buff to
You're
it.
taking it more for the buff to the range than anything else. And since there are 2 relics that you can buff range with, but one of them is Primaris only, so the Crusader Helm is the obvious choice for him. So yeah, I think that's pretty.
But it does work well
solid.
with increasing the AP. All right, so just to kind of go over the list here a little bit, so we kind of how it would ideally be played. So we have a total of 7 drop odds. So if we got first turn, which obviously is 50% of the time, so you want to drop them as close to your opponent as possible to 3 distraction units that we have. So that's going to be the ironclad units in their drop pods, as well as the Vanguard vets. So these are going to be what is going to be right in front of your opponent, because they can deploy in your opponent's phase or in your deployment zone. And they're going to be what is going to be taking your opponent's attention. Now, there is Overwatch, obviously, that is a possibility here. So that's why you're going to be using the assault launchers on your ironclads to kind of shut that down as best as possible in combination with your Vanguard vets, so they don't just shoot you off the board. Obviously, assault launchers, they do get to choose whether or not they are going to take the mortal wounds or shut off Overwatch, but they will have to either eat a bunch of wounds or
I'm
lose
not
the
sure
chance to
it.
shoot at you.
I don't think it shuts off Overwatch. I think it. Let me pull out the
If
book.
they choose,
I think it's they can't
Yeah.
set to defend or hold steady if they're in ruins.
Yep. So it's if they brace, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. If they duck for cover, then until the end of the turn, subtract 1 from the attacks characteristics of the modals in that unit, and they cannot fire Overwatch or set to
Oh.
defend.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So you're right. For some reason, I thought it was something else.
So it's definitely a useful tool for those
Yep.
ironclads to use.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
No good options there, especially if you have a unit that does want to Overwatch. You're either going to take some mortal wounds or, not be able to do what you want.
Yep. So then the rest of our list, we have our Stern Guard combined with the Crusader Squad. That would ideally be on a central midfield objective to give objective secure to that unit, as well as some a more beefy, more dangerous shooting unit to give those crab cannons some targets right there in the center. That, as mentioned before, that heavy bolter also has that stratagem used, available for us to be used. The Hellfire shells to put some wounds on a monster there, if necessary. They're also good against the MEQ equivalents, being damage 2. So then our Crusader squads, the other two, they'll be dropped on whatever objectives you feel that you can hold the best. So you want to make sure that when you're dropping them out of the drop pod, that you can utilize the doors on the drop pod to basically null deploy that objective. So that's going to be key for you. If you are not aware of that, the doors, they flap out.
Yeah, if you deploy the doors, then they count as part of the hull, which means that enemy units cannot come within 1 inch of it without assaulting it. You can't walk over the doors, so it sort of impedes our own models a little bit, but they're not able to walk over the doors. So you can essentially use it to screen your unit by deploying behind one of the pedals, and then you can't be assaulted if there's like terrain or something uh, blocking the path there. So you can kind of use it to sort of help with that.
You can also use it to, with proper positioning and depending on the terrain that's on the board, potentially block off a good chunk of your opponent's ability to get to that objective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with those flaps, you can ideally you don't want to drop it directly on top of the objective, because then your Crusader's Guard won't be able to capture it. But if you pull it off to the side just a little bit and get your Crusader Guards just in range of that objective, your opponent will not be able to get into range of the objective to even capture it from you until they kill the pod. So that's something to think about as well.
Yep.
So we have our objective captures, we have our midfield, and then it really is just going to be adjusting to your opponent as necessary. Yep. So the Devastators are going to be just deployed where you need them. Whatever opponent has that you want to kill, get them as close, ideally as close as possible to your other units to support them, whether that be your Stern Guard units to give rerolls or potentially your another distraction force right up front, but ideally not within charge range, but within 6 inches, so you can get some rerolls there. And just kind of play it by ear. So this is kind of a well-rounded list for you to kind of
I
utilize.
like it. I think it'd be fun to play. You know, Grimaldus showing his value again. Was a great suggestion. Be able to take 2 litanies. Obviously, you can't use both of them first turn when you drop. You have to choose one. But I think it gives you good flexibility. You can, if you need to, put him with, if you want to assault something, give him pop off Canticles of Hate. So that way our Vanguard vets can really get in and make sure that they get that charge range. A 7-inch charge with rerolls is absurdly easy for us. So, should on average always make that charge since the 2d6 roll average is 7 and we get to re-roll it. So, or if you're up against opponent and you're like, there's nothing that I really want to assault. I'd rather use them as like a counter charge unit. You could stick him with the multi-melta guys and give them Catechism of Fire and give them +1 to hit to negate um, their -1 to hit for moving because they'll count as moving when they come in. Some good flexibility with him. We've got some good auras between our lieutenant, our captain, and our 2 dreadnoughts. We can really put an aura just about anywhere where we want to. And then we've got a good melee unit and some solid shooting. So overall, I really like this list. I think it'll be fun to try. I'll definitely be. I don't. I'll have to double check. I don't know if I own 7 drop pods, so I'll have to take a look. I know I own just about everything else here, but I'll certainly, if nothing else, try this out on Tabletop Simulator, and we'll either record it or live stream it or give you guys at least a bat rep on what happened. Just so you can see it sort of in action. So yeah, we really appreciate everybody sticking around, watching the stream with us. This was and yes, Anders, we have considered the FAQ'd Crusaders price, which is why we took them in this list, so that they are, and Battlescribe is up to date on them as well. You can see 15 points. Um, so so yeah, we really appreciate you guys watching with us. This was fun. We want to do more stuff like this. We'll probably set up uh, another um, another live stream at some point. Perhaps we'll do either another poll or pick our second most popular list theme from our poll. But I think this will be good. If you want a link to this list, I will put one in the replay. So I'll have a copy of that, the paste bin link in the replay. If you haven't already, make sure you check out our Discord channel. We thank all you guys and especially our Patreons.
Yep, absolutely. So I think it would take just a couple of minutes at the end, and I can feel too many, but just if there was
Yeah,
any
if anybody has
questions.
any questions before we sign off, I think now's a good time.
I'll give you some typing time here.
Yeah.
And while you're compiling any questions that you may have, another thing I kind of want to circle around to Grimaldus is he has a deny with Death Guard.
Yep.
Coming in heavy. That's going to be, that additional deny is going to be huge. So,
Peter, for why Catechism, just the flexibility of it. We have to choose if we're taking Canticles of Hate. Um, the yeah, the Vanguard vets could use the +1 to wound, but with rerolls to wound, the lightning claws don't benefit as much from it, and neither do the relic blade or thunder hammers. So I think in this circumstance, we're better off taking something that gives us more flexibility in case, because there are some armies that we don't want to fight in melee, like Blood Angels. We don't want, to necessarily take them on. We want to pick and choose our battles against them and whittle them down with fire first. So it just gives us a little bit of extra flexibility. Exhortation of Rage is great, um, but more often, if you're going to choose an offensive litany, especially in the first turn that you charge, you're going to want Litany of Hate.
Yep.
Oh,
And that's what he's
sorry.
referencing.
Yes, Catechism of Fire is the +1 to wound. Yeah, I was misunderstanding. Yeah, because the litany that we took is, what is it called? I always mix those two up. Um, we wanted Recitation of Focus. That's the litany that we want, the +1 to hit. The Catechism of Fire is the +1 to wound. We don't want that one. My apologies. I mixed those up. What do we think of Smash Chaplains or Slaplins? Um, they're uh, no, you're fine, Peter. That was my mistake. I mixed those two litanies up. I was thinking the +1 to hit, and I chose the +1 to wound. The um, Smash Chaplains, you know, you can do them. I think we're probably one of the few chapters that do them fairly well. But to be honest, Smash characters are kind of dead in this edition. We want them rather buffing our units like Vanguard vets and Terminators versus buffing themselves. Um, so it can be something fun to do if you were going to run one. The Chaplain on a bike is absolutely the one you want to take because he's way more durable than any other Chaplain that we have. He's super fast, and uh, you can make him a Master of Sanctity. So,
Yep. Yeah, he suffers from the same reasons why we don't take an Emperor's Champions
yep,
typically, is you want
he's buffing
those
himself
buffs.
versus the units around him. Um, Cheney, what are the units that are the most universally usable in a BT list? Absolutely, the top two units in our list are Vanguard Veterans and Assault Terminators with Thunderhammer and Storm Shields on the Terminators. Vanguard Vets, you've got some options as to what you want to take, but those two units are premier units. Run one or both of them in every list, and you'll have a good, strong melee unit. Vanguard vets, Bob and I recommend a 10-man. Um, the um, Terminators 8 to 10 is fine.
Cough, two veteran squads. Cough.
Yeah, yeah. Bob is leaning now more towards taking two Vanguard veteran squads, which is not a bad idea. Definitely very good. They're silly durable with Storm Shields. Personally, I don't think I'll be running two Vanguard veteran squads simply because I don't want to have to build 10 more Vanguard vets. And that's
Yeah.
literally the only reason. I would love to. If I had 10 more already built, I would absolutely run them, but I just really don't feel like building 10 more guys. So it took me long
Yep.
enough to convert the ones that I do have.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. Just playtesting at the moment. I'm kind of list building at the moment before I can get it on the board to see
Yeah.
how it works and functions. But the versatility of the Vanguard veterans and their durability, as well as how much that they can kill and how fast they are, they're just the ideal unit for the Black Templars.
Yep.
It's really, when you have your assault terminators storming up the middle of the board and your Vanguard veterans are more of a Swiss Army knife. It's it's a great way to get your 3 assault units into your list that are terribly hard to kill, and they can do pretty much anything. So I'm trying to make it work, see if it's feasible, uh, but more to
Um,
come on that.
Yep. And Cuddle Rooster will answer a couple more quick questions before we sign off here. Cuddle Rooster, what are our options versus Mortarion? To be perfectly honest, Marines don't really have anything that can kill him reliably. So the best advice that we have is play the objectives. deal with the rest of his army, and feed him assault intercessors with transhuman, because he only can kill like 2 of them a turn. It's really CP investment heavy on that end, but it will it will tie him up for a couple turns at least, and you just got to play the objectives game.
Uh, I'll take one last one here. Anders, again. What about bikes? Yep, you can tar pit them with a melee unit. One of the best things about bikes is the fact that we don't use them too terribly often, but they cannot go through ruins. Most boards utilize ruins,
A lot.
at least 2 to 3 ruins, and if you can get in those channels between the ruins and block them off, your opponent is not going to have that mobility. They're not going to be able to move through those ruins to get where they need to go. That's one of their biggest disadvantages, and one of the reasons why white scars don't take huge lists of bikes, because
No,
they
White
can't get
Scars are
across the board.
running Vanguard vets with lightning claws and storm shields, is what they're taking.
Yeah.
So
So
very
while
few
the
bikes
the
in White
dark
Scars.
while the dark angels are going to be effective with their biker squads, I don't anticipate them taking full
Full
biker
biker
units.
lists. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, with their Raven Wing, it's going to be speeders, maybe one large biker unit, but it's going to be hard to get that across the board, especially if you block that channel. So it's going to be a disadvantage. Block them. That's the best way. Move and block. So.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching. We really appreciate you sticking around, and we'll keep a lookout. I am still working on the next hobby video, which I'll have out soon. It's on decals. Um, Check out our Discord. Don't forget to enter in our painting competition. The winner will receive a box of the brand new Blade Guard veterans. So that's exciting to enter in that. Just come to our Discord channel and check out the pins in the announcements, and click on the emoji to get the role so you can sign up. Um, we also have a Patreon. If you guys would love to support us, we would absolutely appreciate that. Lets us do more things like this. And Yeah, keep a lookout. We're going to be recording the last few videos of the unit reviews soon here, and hope to have those out to you in the next couple weeks. Yeah.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching and joining us and chatting with us. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Sounds good.